What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Nick, and I hope you guys are doing well whenever you are checking out the latest video here on the channel. Today we have for you guys another fantastic tier list video here. A tier list on some of the best, and admittedly not so best, rock albums out there. I know you guys absolutely love the rock-related videos here, so we have another one for you guys talking about some of the most popular albums and popular releases here from some of the biggest rock bands out there. We have all different subcategories as well, as you can see, from alternative to classic rock, metal in here, some pop punk, some even experimental and avant-garde stuff as well. 50 of the most popular albums here, put in alphabetical order, as always, alongside the world-famous 7 tiers here, ranging from God tier to the infamous bottom of the barrel. Now, this is just going to be my opinion, of course, and feel free to disagree and leave a comment giving your opinion on some of these albums as well. All I ask, as always, is that you keep it civil and you hear others out. So with that in mind, let's get started here, kicking it off with Van Halen's 1984. This is easily their most popular record out there. It definitely has a lot of those hard rock-inspired elements to it, as well as even some synth rock elements to it. This is a very electronic-inspired album. Came out in the mid-'80s there when the synth rock movement was really taking off. And to be honest with you, even though I do enjoy this album, I honestly feel like this one belongs only in the good tier. I find it a little bit overrated, a little bit overplayed at times. Some of those bigger songs, such as Hot for Teacher, Panama Jump, for example, those big singles, I just hear a lot on classic rock radio, and I think they're a little bit overrated, as I said earlier, but overall, still not a terrible record by any means, still a very solid, complete release. Following that, next up we have the Beatles with Abbey Road here, and if you are a rock fan, you cannot have this any lower than the God tier status. It totally deserves it. This is, in my opinion, the best album by the Beatles there. That's a very hotly contested debate, whether you prefer the White Album or Sgt. Pepper as well, some of their bigger releases in addition to, of course, Abbey Road here. But for me, the sort of chemistry that the band really has on this one, all of the great sort of psychedelic elements and even progressive rock elements at times on this record really coming together. There's also some heavy metal influence here. Just a great collage of all these different subgenres coming together with the Beatles' magnum opus there, in my opinion, the Abbey Road album coming in at the God tier level. Following that, next up is Sum 41's All Killer No Filler. This was their debut back in 2001 here from the pop punk band Sum 41, and I think this is a pretty great record. I'm going to put it right there in the great tier. I do find it to be a little bit repetitive at times. That's the only reason it's not a little bit higher. It can get a little samey at times. Some of the songs do kind of blend with one another, and there's not a whole ton of variety here. But for their very first record, this was a very impressive output here. I think they would definitely develop their sound later. They would definitely take in some of those metal elements that they kind of started on this record towards the back half of it and really expand on that later in their discography. But for a start here, this is a pretty solid album. Following that, however, we have, in my opinion, one of the worst and easily most overrated rock albums of all time, American Beauty by the Grateful Dead. Now, if you guys have seen some of my previous tier lists, then you'll know that the Grateful Dead is easily one of my least favorite bands out there. I just do not understand their appeal whatsoever. This one being their biggest album to date here with some of their biggest songs on this record. And believe me, guys, I have tried my hardest to get into this band. I have heard the praises. I have seen the critically acclaimed scores that this album in particular has gotten over the years, and I just fall asleep every single time I try. Plotting, it's slow, it does absolutely nothing for me. I have no redeeming positive things to say about this record. This one goes directly into the bottom of the barrel. However, immediately after that, we have arguably my favorite album of all time here, not just in the rock category, but all across music, we have Green Day's American Idiot here. I mean, Green Day, you guys know, is my favorite band of all time, so naturally this is going right up to the top tier there in the God tier level next to the Beatles there. The rock opera elements, of course, that great storyline they have going through this record, and so many big hit singles from this, whether it's Holiday, American Idiot, Boulevard of Broken Dreams, Jesus of Suburbia, probably my favorite track from this album. There is just so much to like here. You really can't go wrong with some great punk in there from Green Day. Following that, another one of the all-time best here, another debut album, believe it or not, Guns N' Roses with Appetite for Destruction, a hard rock masterpiece here, going as well in the God tier status. I've talked about Guns N' Roses previously on my channel before. I absolutely love their chemistry. I love Slash as a guitarist. In fact, he's probably my favorite guitarist of all time there. Just the riffs and the solos and the energy that he brings to this record is really unmatched, and there's so much depth in the lyrics as well. This is a very underrated album as far as how sentimental some of the songwriting is here. It's very, very well crafted. This is just an all-around fantastic release here, a must-listen for any rock fan. Another one in that same category has to be AC/DC here with Back in Black. I'm putting them at A1 here, A1 for AC/DC, of course. Absolutely love this one as well. Some of my favorite deep cuts from AC/DC on this record, such as Giving the Dog a Bone. That's probably my favorite song off of this one. But there's so many great singles as well, including the title track, one of the band's most popular outputs as well. This just has a lot of great fundamental hard rock elements to it. Very simple at times, but very, very good all the same. You really can't go wrong with AC/DC either. A album that I have mentioned tons on this channel. In fact, I have a whole video dedicated to it on my page here where I go through each individual song and rank them from worst to best here. We have The Black Parade by My Chemical Romance, an absolutely outstanding album as well. Another one that we have to put in the God tier category. This is similar to American Idiot in the sense that it is a rock opera. It has this very thematic and even cinematic feel at times, with this great storyline about this patient who is dying of cancer and his journey into the afterlife there. And of course, you can't forget about Welcome to the Black Parade, the sentimental release from this record, the band's biggest song by a landslide there. An absolutely outstanding piece of art deserving of that God tier level. Coincidentally, another band that I've talked about quite a bit here, and another album I have in the album rank series on my channel here where I go through each song and rank it from worst to best. We have Bleed American by the pop punk group Jimmy Eat World. Now, I'm going to put this one in A1 tier, not quite to the level of a Black Parade or an American Idiot in my opinion, but still a very, very solid pop punk release here. Lots of really bouncy, fun, energetic, positive songs on this record. Such as the title track there, Sweetness, one of the band's biggest hits as well as the middle there, probably the most recognizable song from Jimmy Eat World's discography. This is another one that if you're a pop punk fan like me, or you just grew up in the 2000s, you definitely know your way around this record. It is an A1 worthy album for sure. In the metal category now, transitioning a bit to a different genre, we have Ozzy Osbourne here with Blizzard of Oz. This is an outstanding metal release, arguably the best that Ozzy has ever done. It's definitely going to go high up in the great tier here. Personally, though, I wouldn't even call Ozzy the best performer on this record because that title would have to go to Randy Rhoads here, the guitarist for Ozzy Osbourne. He was absolutely incredible at his young age. He passed away very early on, only in his 20s. Very, very sad loss, of course, and many people in the rock world fondly remember his time with Ozzy Osbourne here, this probably being some of his best work. There are so many great solos here, some great opening riffs. One of my favorites from the song Crazy Train there, that is just so iconic there, to air guitar to every time you turn it on. You really can't go wrong with Ozzy as well here, so this is another one that I'm putting high up on this tier list, firmly in the great tier. Boston here with their self-titled album next up, another debut album here, and another one that's going to go in the great tier here. I really enjoy Boston. This one does kind of suffer from some overplay, overexposure as well with some of these albums, as I mentioned earlier. on classic rock radio. There's definitely some songs on here, such as More Than a Feeling, that I've heard one too many times before, but there's some really, really great deep cuts on here as well. This is actually one of my dad's favorite albums, so he was the one that kind of introduced me to it at a very young age and kind of got me into classic rock as well, which you can definitely tell the influence from if you've seen some of my other videos here. But Boston are just so legendary. They're just so much fun to turn on whenever you just need a great pick-me-up. This is a comfort album for me for sure, so this one's going to go in the great tier as a result. Candlebox next up, easily one of the most overlooked grunge bands of all time. Everyone knows the big four when it comes to grunge, those being Nirvana, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, and Pearl Jam here, but Candlebox, I think, absolutely deserves to be on their status as well, especially if you listen through this debut album of theirs, their self-titled record. This one is absolutely jam-packed with so many great guitar moments and some great drum work here. The chemistry with this band is off the charts once again. This is another great album that deserves its status in rock history. We have yet another self-titled record and another debut here from another classic rock legend band. We have the Cars here with their self-titled release, and this one is tough to pick because this could definitely slide into the A1 tier, or it could go in the great tier, depending on the mood I'm in. But you know what? Today, we're going to go all out for it and go in the A1 tier. This is a fantastic record, absolutely jam-packed with some of their biggest works. Another one that is just absolutely great from top to bottom here. You cannot go wrong with the Cars here, an alt-rock, power pop, legendary band here in the classic rock scene. How could you go wrong with that? Pat Benatar here with Crimes of Passion next up, a hard rock legend as well. Recently got into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Congrats on that. Well deserved, in my opinion, for Pat Benatar. I was actually just listening to this album this morning, in fact, and it really does hold up. There are some great, great moments on this one. Another one that's going to go firmly into the great tier, I believe. I think, honestly, that Pat Benatar could arguably be the best female rock singer or female rock star of all time. And that's another very hotly contested debate. You have people like Gwen Stefani from No Doubt, Hayley Williams of Paramore, even Joan Jett, of course, one of the legends from the band The Runaways. But I think Pat Benatar really does shine through with her. Her vocal ability is just unmatched here, just absolutely immaculate. Some of the ranges that she can hit, some of the notes that she can hit really, really does make a huge impact on you when you first listen to this record. And then, of course, her husband, Neil Giraudo, as well on the guitar there. They've worked together on all of her releases, and he does an incredible job as well. So, again, another one that I just cannot stop talking about how good it is. So, absolutely going to go high up here in the great tier. Tom Petty with Damn the Torpedoes here. This is one of his albums that was released alongside his band, The Heartbreakers, as well. He's got a few different albums released under different titles, either with The Heartbreakers or just under his solo career, just under Tom Petty. But in my opinion, this is probably his best work here, Damn the Torpedoes. The opening track to this one, Refugee, one of my favorite classic rock songs out there, one of his biggest hits, of course. Really the song that put him on the map, in my opinion, for sure, that came from this album. Absolutely a terrific release from start to finish here. If you're a classic rock fan and you enjoy Tom Petty, you know how good this one is, and it has deserved its classic rock legendary status for many, many years now. That's well deserving of a great tier placement. Alrighty, we have come to easily what's probably the most recognizable album on this entire list, even more so than the Beatles, even more so than Green Day, even more so than Guns N' Roses. We have Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. And before all of you classic rock purists come at me in the comments and say, how could you put this so low at the good tier? Hear me out on this one. When you come to this album and you're in the right mood and it just hits you in that incredible, undescribable way that only Pink Floyd could do, this is, without question, one of the best albums of all time. But when you're not in that mood, there's pretty much anything else that you would rather be listening to at that time. This is really one of those albums that I'll put on maybe, every couple of months or so when I really want to just dive into the music and really experience everything that Pink Floyd has to showcase for themselves. But when I'm just not in that, when I'm just in a more casual mood, when I just want to listen to something that's just going to cheer me up or, just, get me going, give some energy to me, this is really one of the last albums I come to, because you can't really cherry pick any of the songs out. You can maybe in certain ways, but as a whole, this is just one of those few albums that you have to be committed to listening to start to finish without skipping a single track on here. And for the most part, I just don't really have that sort of mindset when it comes to most albums out there. There's usually at least one or two songs on most records that, you tend to skip around if you've heard it too much, or maybe it's just not one of your favorites. And, it's just one of those songs that is just left better off without listening to. But with Dark Side of the Moon, that's, you can't do that, right? This is just one of the exceptions to that rule. And so as a result, it definitely does make its impact every once in a while, but it's not something you're going to come back to every single day. So there's my piece on it. You are more than welcome to disagree for sure. I think it is a very, very good record, but because of the fact that I'm not really coming back to it more than once every couple of months, like I said, it is going to go in the good tier. Following that, next up, we have The Doors here with their sentimental release of 1967, their self-titled record. This is another one that's going to go very high up here in the A1 tier. Absolutely a massive fan of this one for sure. I mean, Jim Morrison, easily one of the best rock vocalists out there. Rest in peace, my guy. Absolutely well-deserved of his legendary status as well. The real takeaway from this one, in my opinion, are those insanely infectious psychedelic elements that really showcase just what the Doors could do right out of the gate. And famously, this album is very, very influential for many, many big bands of the time, such as the Beach Boys or the Beatles even, that really helped engage listeners with some more psychedelic sounds and more keyboard-oriented elements, not so much just guitar, but really a whole musical array of different instruments. The Doors, famously a band that did not feature a bass player, which is very, very unique for a rock band, and had incredible success, of course, without one. So really, really challenging what we thought of as rock back in the day, and really invoking this very unique sound that still permeates to this day in modern music, which is very, very impressive when you consider that this album is more than 55 years old. So with that said, I mean, how could you not put it up there in the A1 tier? The Doors, a legendary band, legendary album, one of my favorites. Coming back to a little more of a modern sound here, an alt-rock album from the 90s. Here we have Dosage from the band Collective Soul. A very, very underrated release. This is another one that's going in the great tier here. I think Collective Soul has one of the best underrated guitar players out there. Dude is just absolutely incredible here. And even in addition to all of that, this sound just does not get old for me. You guys know, if you've seen some of my past videos, that the alt-rock sound and the sort of, alternative movement of the 90s there, that is my favorite musical genre of all time. Alt-rock, pop-punk, all that good stuff from the late 90s, early 2000s. And this album, I think, is one of the best examples. If you've never really experienced it for yourself, this is a great starting point here, because it perfectly blends all of those elements together and really gives you a very cohesive sort of image and picture of what that sound was really like, not just back then, but how it influenced today's music as well. So another one that has huge high marks for me, going straight up in the great tier. Elephant here by the White Stripes, a hometown favorite here in Detroit here with Jack White, of course. I think that this album is another one that deserves its great status. It might be a little bit overrated, a little bit overplayed at times, but there are some really good songs on here, just outside of Seven Nations Army, of course, probably the band's most popular song there. But really, really a great record all around. Jack White, of course, an incredible guitarist here. I mean, easily deserving of all of the accolades and all of the awards that he has collected over his career. And in addition, his wife, at the time at least, Meg White, of course, on the drums there. It took me a while to really kind of appreciate her simplicity, I guess you could say, because she doesn't really go all out. She's very minimal in how she approaches the kind of overall vibe of the song in question. But once you really get into it and you start kind of experiencing what the band is trying to go for there, that's when it really starts to blossom and it starts to click with you, if that makes sense. So after a few listens, you'll start to understand it. So yeah, Elephant there by the White Stripes, a great record. Going back to the pop punk side of things, we have Enema of the State by Blink-182, another one that you really cannot go wrong with whatsoever. That's going straight up in the God tier status. It's honestly not even my favorite Blink record. I'm a massive fan of them, and there's a couple out there, such as California is probably my favorite, that would rank slightly above it. That would also be in the God tier, of course, but just for being their biggest record and really putting them on the map, Enema is a very important album in the pop punk scene, and as a result is easily going up there for the influence and the quality alone. King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, easily one of the most underrated rock bands of all time there, with their album Flying Microtonal Banana. Silly name aside, this record is absolutely outstanding. Experimental rock, kind of like a psychedelic rock, has some even like new age and kind of like world music elements to it. It is all over the place, but man, if there was one album that really sums up for me just how good modern psychedelic music is in the past maybe 10 or so years, this would be it, man. This would be my pick for it. Absolutely incredible. The band really has this very unique approach to their instrumentation as well, actually showcasing two different drummers that they have, which is really unique. So the drums here feel very full and very alive and very passionate here, which is a very unique sound to have. And sort of a cluttered, if you talk about modern music, of course, everything sounds the same, or that's the cliche, at least that a lot of people hold. But they have not listened to this record, because this doesn't sound like anything else out there right now, and it's absolutely fantastic. So yes, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizards, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizards, Fine Microtonal Banana. Geez, that is a tongue twister if I've ever seen one. But this record is absolutely fantastic. God tier status, it belongs. Transitioning out of that, however, we do have to talk about another album that just unfortunately does not do much for me, and is another one going alongside the Grateful Dead here in the bottom of the barrel tier, and that is the self-titled album by the pop punk group Forever the Sickest Kids. Now, if you grew up in the 2000s there, or the late 2000s, you'll probably know that Forever the Sickest Kids was a pretty big deal for a brief time. They were very commercially successful. Their music appeared in several different movies, several different commercials. I remember them actually being in several Nerf commercials from back in the day, if you can believe it. I've mentioned previously that I was huge on Nerf as a kid, so I grew up with this music, and to tell you the truth, a lot of their earlier stuff from like Dog Days and Uma Mater and stuff like that, those really do still hold a big place for me in sort of my taste in music and what really got me into pop punk specifically as a genre. But this album from 2011, that was a few years after their peak, I think really watered them down. This just doesn't have a lot of bite to it. It feels very empty. It feels very hollow. It has a more pop sound to it, which is fine. I'm not necessarily against that. But for this particular band, it just felt like they went too far off the deep end here, and they just didn't hold on to enough of that raw edge that made them so compelling in the first place. And that's really my biggest takeaway and my biggest criticism with this record, is that it just doesn't really represent the band all that well. This particular example just really wasn't what people had come to know this band for, and a lot of people really were soured on them after this release, myself included. So this one was just not really it at all. Going into the bottom of the barrel there, Forever the Sickest Kids self-titled release. Let's go back to talking about the good albums here on this tier list, including one of my all-time favorites with Billy Joel, Glass Houses here. This is a comfort album for me, man. This is the one that I throw on every time I just need a good pick me up here. When I was going through, when we were all going through, I should say, the lockdowns and, quarantine, COVID and stuff right at the peak of the pandemic, this was my go-to record, man. This one just made me feel better. Billy Joel is just such a anthemic performer. He has so much personality, just so much liveliness to his voice, and the way that he plays and such is just very, very compelling. And this record, I think, is arguably very underrated in his catalog. I know a lot of people would probably say The Stranger is their favorite by him, and that's an amazing record. Like, that is absolutely incredible. Top 50, best rock albums of all time. For sure, but Glass Houses, man, just has so much depth and so much variety in this one. Some of the bigger hits from this one, you may be right, probably the most famous song from this album, but outside of that, you have great deep cuts like Sleeping with the Television On, and the one that he does purely in French is really cool as well. I would not be able to say the name. I would definitely butcher it, believe me, but that's a great song as well. And there's just so many great little, elements in this one, little things within each song that really make it very memorable, that make you want to come back and listen through it as much as possible. So without question, another slam dunk for Billy Joel, going in the God tier. Another very underrated album here on my tier list is Goodbye Jumbo by World Party. This is my brother Matt's favorite album of all time here, and his favorite band of all time being World Party here. Very, very underrated for sure. I'm going to put them in the great tier here. I think this record is unbelievable. Another one that I listened to earlier this morning before I recorded this video here, and it really does remind me a lot of bands of the time like REM and 10,000 Maniacs that kind of have that college rock, jangle rock, alternative sort of feel to them, really, really taking inspiration from a lot of different groups and really putting them together in a very unique way. The band leader here, Karl Wallinger, very, very talented multi-instrumentalist here, does some great guitar work. He's the main songwriter. He is the lead singer of this band. He really is like, the all-in-one package when it comes to the alt-rock scene here for World Party specifically, and his songwriting is unbelievable here. The imagery that he pulls into it just has this very intense depth of emotion that you can subscribe to it. It is just a very, very unique piece of alt-rock history here that I think a lot of people tend to ignore or sleep on, or just do not simply know because it's just so underrated. So if you get the chance, definitely check it out. This is a great record. Highly, highly recommend from an alt-rock fan like myself to another like you. Goodbye Yellow Brick Road here next up by Elton John. Speaking of my dad here, this is my dad's favorite album of all time. So we had my brothers and now my dad's here, and he is another one that just has so much influence on me and, my musical taste, introducing me to a whole boatload of these different records here. This is another one that I absolutely love. I'm going to put it in the A1 tier. I mean, Elton John in general, similar to Billy Joel we were talking about earlier, just has this very unique array of playing style and very lively sort of performances and such. If you ever see him play live, just an incredible performer, just so charismatic, so personable. Of course, he has the flashy costumes and such as well, but just has this very, very, personable, sort of realistic, universal sort of tone to his music, which makes it so compelling. And this record, even though it is very long, it's well over 2 discs long, 30 songs or so, or just around there. It is an incredible listen through if you give it the proper time of day. So much variety on this one. You can go from, a hard rocker to, a more ballad type song with some very soft, breezy elements to it, to, stuff like Jamaican Jerk Off, which is like totally in a different realm there. So much different elements and so many different genres shining through on this one. Absolutely incredible, an A1 tier worthy record. Transitioning from that, we have one of the most popular albums of all time here with Hotel California by the Eagles. Now, I am not really a huge Eagles fan. I do respect the Eagles for sure. I think they've made a few really, really good songs, and I do appreciate their contributions to the world of rock and to the world of even country music, you could argue, or kind of folk rock and southern rock. They kind of all bleed into those different genres at times. But this particular record, I just don't really feel like it does much for me as a whole. I'm going to put it in the meh tier. It's just kind of okay. It certainly does have some very lively songs to it, and the title track, Hotel California, is a very fun and, kind of thought-provoking song at times. It has a really good story behind it, but it just doesn't really have a lot of staying power with me, and that's really my biggest critique of this record. It kind of just goes in one ear and out the other. It doesn't really stick with you. It's not really that memorable. And for most of these other records, especially in comparison to them, if you gave me the choice to listen to this versus anything else that we've talked about thus far, probably going to take most of what else is on here as opposed to Hotel California. So there's my reasoning behind it. It's still, a decent album. It's not something I would turn off immediately, but I just think it's pretty overrated compared to most of what's out there by comparison. Next up here, we have The Killers and their debut with Hot Fuzz here from 2004. The Killers, a very, very underrated band as well. They would kind of go into the pop punk side of things at times, but they're very much more thematic than that, and they have some, cinematic type of elements as well. But really, they just shine through as a great classic, sort of alt-rock indie band at their core, especially through their frontman, Brandon Flowers here, who is very, very influenced by classic and power pop records such as The Cars we talked about earlier. He's mentioned in interviews before, which is really, really cool. And for me, I think it shines through beautifully here. I'm going to go A1 tier with this one. Been listening through this one quite a bit over the last few months here. Really one that I do want to make a video on, ranking all the songs for this one. So if that's something you want to see, definitely let me know in the comments if that's something you'd be interested in checking out. But yeah, this is a great record here all around. Really have nothing to complain with this one. I think A1 tier is totally justified. Going to another metal record now, we have DragonForce here with their album Inhuman Rampage. This is a crazy record through and through. Probably best known for including the song Through the Fire and the Flames, which was huge back in the early 2000s or like mid 2000s in the game Guitar Hero 3. That's where it really sprung up in popularity there for being just notoriously difficult, which is really funny. DragonForce in general is definitely one of those bands that's more of a novelty because you don't really like the thought of listening through a whole album of theirs is kind of repetitive and it gets pretty tiring after a while. And for me, it kind of floats in between the good and the meh tier. I think today I'm going to go more meh tier because it's just not something that I would really come back to all that much. It's kind of neat to check out a couple songs here and there from it, but again, listening through the whole thing, start to finish there, would not really choose to do it much often. So for me, I'm going to say meh tier is appropriate for DragonForce. Next up is Scorpions and their record In Trance here. I got to give a shout out to my buddy Joe here because he was actually the one that introduced me to this record. I never heard this before. I really knew Scorpions more as like a glam rock, sort of hard rock band from the 80s there with some of their more, glam inspired songs such as Rock You Like a Hurricane, Wind of Change, of course, very big for them. But he said that earlier they started off as more of like a metal band, and I was not aware of that. So checked out this record, and this was one of their earlier releases, In Trance here, and I think it's pretty solid. It's not something I would come back to all the time, but for what it is, especially as early in the band's career as they made it in, and with the little experience that they had doing this style, I think it's really, really solid here. I'll put it in the good tier for sure. I definitely think that there are some like very dated songs here is probably the best way to describe it. There's a song called Robot Man on here, which is really cheesy. Me and him were joking about that after I listened through it, and he was kind of quizzing me on it one day, and I said, yeah, I liked it, but there's definitely some cheesy dated songs on here that have like that very cheesy sort of 70s metal type vibe. Even like early Black Sabbath at times it kind of reminded me of, has some of those cheesy elements to it, but it's still a lot of fun in small doses here, and it's definitely something I think is worth digging up if you do enjoy early metal like this. So if that's your vibe, I think you're going to enjoy this just fine here, and I think a good tier is appropriate. Jagged Little Pill next up, easily one of the biggest landmark albums here for not just Alanis Morissette here, the artist behind it, but also just the grunge and sort of the alternative rock movement of the mid-90s here. This one coming out in 95 here, right in the middle of it. And for me, it's an A1 tier album, man. I know some people would probably argue that this is a pretty overrated record and very overplayed for some circles, and that's totally fine if you think that, but man, Alanis Morissette just shines through incredibly well. I talked about Pat Benatar earlier, and arguably she being the best rock vocalist ever, but you could also give that title to Alanis here because she does some incredible stuff with her voice on this record. The incredible range that she gives, it really shines through as just a total rock album, man. You can't say anything else about it. You can't say it's pop. You can't say it's even like soft rock at times. This is just a full-on rock record, man, that rock fans adore. And even though it has some elements like the harmonicas in there, for example, that kind of give it a different twang at times, it's still very much at its core a true rock album. So for that alone, I got to give it A1 tier. Just so many incredible songs here. You Ought to Know, of course, their big blow-up song, and really what put them on the map with this album. Just an incredible release. So yeah, all things considered, A1 tier for Atlantis. Another one that goes very, very high up, this time in the God tier status, we have Led Zeppelin's debut. Led Zeppelin, another band that just has so much history and so much legacy behind them, and another one that is very arguable which of their albums is best. Similar to how we talked about the Beatles earlier, you could pick this one, you could pick 4, you could even pick 2. I've even seen some people say Physical Graffiti or Houses of the Holy. Some of their later stuff there is also very, very good, but in my opinion, their debut here, Led Zeppelin 1, is my favorite of the bunch. Just so many incredible, iconic songs on here. Communication Breakdown, Good Times, Bad Times is just anthemic with those great drums on there. John Bonham just does an absolutely wonderful job. Just so much to like here. There's really nothing you can say bad about this one, especially if you enjoy hard rock and metal, as we've been talking about here. This is a must listen. This is an absolute must listen here. Led Zeppelin, a great, great album. Another shout out to Joe on this one, London Calling by The Clash. I know if he's watching, man, he's going to absolutely dig this one because this is his favorite record of all time. We're really hitting all of the different boxes here. We've gone to Matt's favorite, we've gone to my dad's, and now Joe's here, and mine as well. As I said, American Idiot earlier, arguably one of my favorites, definitely top 3 for sure. But as for The Clash here, London Calling, this is a great record. I really have no quarrels with this one at all. This is fantastic and through and through. The only reason it's not higher, I just don't come back to this as much as some of those other ones in the A1 or the God tier. The Clash in general, just known for being very outspoken and really attaining that punk style throughout their career. This probably being their most political album as well, if you couldn't even tell by the title itself, London Calling. Just an incredible, just force of nature this record is, and just how impactful it was to the punk movement of the 70s there, and then going further into the 80s as well, with many big bands like Bad Religion and the Dead Kennedys coming out of this. I mean, it was just so influential. It still remains one of the most highly regarded, rock albums of all time. There has one of the most iconic album covers as well. Just another little, piece of trivia there, but still an incredible release all around. This is definitely a great album to check out. All right, one more album that I think we have to get through here that just isn't really for me, unfortunately. We have CCR's Mardi Gras here. Now, I know a lot of you are probably going to complain that, of all the albums I could have picked for CCR, why would I pick Mardi Gras? Well, honestly, I didn't even know that this was a thing, because I always looked at this record as being very notoriously bad. I know a lot of people don't like it, but little did I know that there are some defenders out there of Mardi Gras, but actually, more specifically, the song that came from this record, the only single from it, Sweet Hitchhiker, is apparently one of the band's more underrated tracks. Yeah, I don't know where that came from, but if you ask certain CCR fans, they'll tell you that that's their favorite from the entire band's discography, a Sweet Hitchhiker from this record. And honestly, I hate to break it to them, but that song is trash. That song is absolutely garbage. I have no interest in listening to that ever again. I enjoy CCR, I really do. I think they're really influential, like sort of blues rock, and they have that sort of southern rock twang to them at times. They always kind of blurred the lines between being a country band and being a rock band. They were always a rock band at their core, but this record just took it too far in the other direction. There were just some flat out country songs on this record, and that's something I've talked about in the past that I'm just not a fan of. I just don't really get country music whatsoever. It's just not my cup of tea. So this is another reason why I just don't really vibe with this album all that much. And John Fogerty kind of took a step back with this one and kind of let some of the other members contribute more to this one, write some of the songs. And I just don't think they really were up to par with John's writing from some of their previous outputs here. The whole record is just kind of a big experimental, kind of see what CCR could do that they hadn't done before. What can we push the boundaries of that we didn't do in our previous records? And it just kind of comes out as being a mess here all around. Even Sweet Hitchhiker, the song that, has a cult fan base behind it, isn't even really that prominent on the album. It's the last song on this record. So even the band kind of knew that this was just kind of be a flop, and there just wasn't really a lot of passion put into this one. It just kind of comes off as half-assed, is kind of the overall sort of title I would give it. So all in all, just a very disappointing record, a bad album. Not as bad as the Grateful Dead. I would not put them on the same category as that, but still not a very good one whatsoever. This is just a thumbs down from me. However, a album that is very much a thumbs up, in my opinion, is Television here with Marquee Moon. If you guys like albums like Joy Division or anything that's post-punk, even like The Cure to some degree, I would kind of make an argument here, sort of that goth rock or post-punk sort of styles to it. If you like bands or albums like that, you will absolutely love Television, Marquee Moon. Talking Heads is kind of another one you can kind of throw into that boat as well. But this album just absolutely influential, super underrated as well, just kind of with the general rock crowd. I know critics, of course, will definitely tell you that this album has always been one of the best, but for most people, this is just one that they have never really given the proper time to listen through, and that's very disappointing because there are so many really great natural harmonies on this one, great chemistry with the band, the guitar work, the bass work, the singing here, it all comes through very cleanly, very just cohesive, is the best way to describe this one. So if you've never given it a listen, definitely try to spin it one of these days, because it is definitely worth your time. A great record all around. Following that, we have All American Rejects Move Along here, another pop-punk record from the mid-2000s here. Now, I've always kind of been in and out with the All American Rejects there. I've talked about in the past that, I kind of understood why they were so prominent. They definitely fit the radio-friendly, market of the 2000s, right? When Top 40 was still a big thing, and when rock was kind of having this second wind of sorts with, all these pop-punk bands that started springing up here. And compared to even like a Blink-182 or a Green Day, I feel like the All American Rejects really had those radio-friendly hooks to them. They had very clean lyrics. They weren't controversial. They didn't try to push, this political agenda like Green Day did, for example. So they really found a niche audience in, soccer moms and, young kids that could kind of inspire or kind of be a part of this movement here that felt like they were rock, but, inside were really more pop-oriented, genre-wise. And that always kind of bothered me because I never really understood why they didn't embrace those rock, senses here, because I think the best songs, especially from this record, are the true rock ones, like Dirty Little Secret. The title track is great here. There are some really, really good cuts off of this album, but for the most part, it just doesn't really fit in the same way that most of these other ones do, and it's even arguable that it's not even a rock record, as I've been kind of, approaching here. So for what it is, it's fine. I don't really have that much bad necessarily to say about it, but just in comparison to everything else we have on this list, it just kind of is a more middle of the road album than something like Green Day or Blink-182, for instance. So for me, I'm going to say good tier. It's not the worst thing out there, but especially compared to anything else of the time, I think this is pretty second or third tier in that regard. So it's a decent album, but it's not something I'm going to come back to every single day. On the other hand, an album like Rush's Moving Pictures, I could listen to pretty much every day, and I would absolutely adore it here because this album is fantastic. This is A1 tier at its finest, my friend. Progressive rock, of course, with Rush there. All three members of the band here. Neil Peart on the drums and the lead songwriter here. We have Geddy Lee on the bass as the lead singer as well, and then Alex Lifeson on the guitar there. All three of them doing an incredible job here through and through. Easily the band's most celebrated work by a long shot here, and very, very well deserved in my opinion. A1 tier is where it goes. Going back to the metal side of rock here with Black Sabbath and their album Paranoid here, another one of my all-time favorites. I'm going to throw this one as well in the A1 tier. Black Sabbath, honestly, next to Metallica, is probably my favorite metal band or heavy metal group of all time here, and this is my favorite album by them is Paranoid, so without question, I mean, this has to get high marks here. I've mentioned in the past that I think Ozzy Osbourne solo is honestly even better than Black Sabbath, but I think compared to just their peaks here, when we're looking at just Blizzard of Oz and Paranoid, I would actually give Paranoid the edge here. I think as a whole, Black Sabbath is just a little more inconsistent than Ozzy as on his own, but when they really wanted to hit high and really get those high marks, they were able to, and this record is the definitive example of just that. So for me, A1 tier is where it goes. Lynyrd Skynyrd here with their debut Pronounced Lynyrd Skynyrd. I honestly think that compared to some of the other like country rock or southern rock that we've talked about thus far, I don't think this album is bad by any means, but again, it just doesn't really have a lot of staying power with me. This is one of those that again has a huge fan base out there. Lynyrd Skynyrd, one of the most influential rock groups of the 70s, so I'm sure I'm going to get some comments about this one as well here. There are some very iconic songs here. My favorite from this one, and probably my favorite Lynyrd Skynyrd song out there, is Gimme 3 Steps, which is a little bit of an unpopular opinion because a lot of people really like Freebird, of course. I like Freebird too, but it has gotten a little overexposed at times, and for being as influential as they are, their direct sound in the southern rock and again some having that country rock sort of elements to it didn't really have as much staying power, didn't really connect as much with future bands and future artists that would kind of come after them, as well as like a metal album from Black Sabbath or something, or that post-punk album like we were talking about with Television or something, and that sort of genre. I feel like the southern rock that we know from the 70s really did only appear in the 70s, right? It just didn't really live on the same way, if that makes sense, as some of the other subgenres that we've been discussing here. And I think this album, for all good that it did, it also did kind of a lot of bad because a lot of the southern rock that came afterwards just really didn't have the same, it didn't hit the same, if that makes sense. So, but as a whole, I don't think this is a bad album, but it's just not something I'm going to spin through and through all day long. And as a result, I'm going to put it in the meh tier. On the other hand, however, we have Prince next up and his album Purple Rain here. I mean, come on. It's Purple Rain, guys. If you didn't expect this to go in the God tier, I don't know what kind of channel you think I am, because this is an absolutely outstanding record. There are so many songs here that I could sing you word for word here, both the big hits like When Doves Cry, the deep cuts like Computer Blue or Darling Nikki, man, are so good. I mean, there are just so many incredible songs on here. The movie, of course, as well, that this album comes from, Purple Rain itself, is honestly not that bad, all things considered. I mean, Prince, maybe not the best actor of all time, probably not going to get an Oscar anytime soon, but still, for what it is, it can be a fun watch, and the music is phenomenal. I mean, just the sights of Prince playing and seeing him live is what makes it for everyone. So for sure, this is a God tier record, essential listening for any rock fan out there. Alrighty, another one that is very, very polarizing here on my channel, and another band that I have had some quarrels with in the past here, is Def Leppard here. A lot of people that have seen some of my previous videos have argued with me in the comments, or, not argued per se, but just given their opinion on how Def Leppard is much better than I give them credit for. And that's totally fine if you're a fan of them. But personally, I think they really only have one really outstanding record here, and this one is it. It's Pyromania. I know a lot of people really like Hysteria. That's probably their most popular. I think Hysteria, honestly, is very overrated. I think it's very bland. I just don't think it has the same staying power. I think Pour Some Sugar on Me is a very overrated and very overdone song. And by comparison, I think Pyromania just has a lot more edge and a lot more rawness to it that I really like from Def Leppard, especially their song Photograph. Of like all their big songs, all their big singles, that's the one I would take well over Pour Some Sugar on Me any day. So that's my justification for it. You are more than welcome to disagree, though. Totally fine, but I think Def Leppard as a whole, really just kind of inconsistent band. This definitely was their peak. This album alone is worth checking out, but everything else from them, honestly, is pretty mediocre. Another album, however, that we do not have that problem with is the Ramones' self-titled record here, their debut as well here. We've seen quite a few of these on this tier list thus far, and for good reason, because most of them are outstanding here, including this one. I mean, again, you guys know I absolutely love punk, and we've talked about The Clash so far, and Green Day, and all these great punk bands that really came after the Ramones here, but the Ramones were really the one that put punk up on the map. CBGB's, of course, in New York, extremely famous punk club that really gave way to a lot of big bands of the day, such as Patti Smith and the Talking Heads, and a lot of people that originated from there. And the Ramones were one of the biggest, commercially at least, that did so, that came out of that sort of scene and that sort of era of music. And in my opinion, the one thing about this record that really holds true is how unapologetic it is. This is a true to form punk album day and night, and it has, 2-minute songs, and they are fast-paced, and you can't really understand the lyrics. And that's exactly what the punk spirit and the punk genre is to me and to so many others all over the world. And this perfectly embodies exactly that every single time you pick it up. Going to be consistent there. It's going to be reliable. If that's the kind of music you're into and that's, the kind of thing you want any given day, you can come back to this record and you know exactly what you're going to get each and every time. And that's why I and millions others love it so much. A1 tier is where it goes. We have another album in the metal category here. This one from one of the big four thrash metal bands that isn't Metallica, that is. This is instead Slayer's Reign in Blood. Now, I do have a confession to make with this album. This was one that I loved back in the day in high school. This was one of my most played in high school when I was really getting into metal, and especially thrash metal, and really exploring the big four of thrash: Metallica, Slayer, Anthrax, and Megadeth there. And I really vibed with this one. I really enjoyed every single song on this one. Listened to it all the time here. But since then, it has been a while since I've listened through this one all the way through. And I think, honestly, I just kind of wore myself out on this one. I got a little bit sick of it after a while. And it's been, at least a couple years since I've properly given it a listen here. But going off of nostalgia and just going off of, the legacy on this one, I'm still going to put it firmly in the great tier. I think it holds a lot of weight, especially in the metal category, of course. It's arguably better at times than Master of Puppets by Metallica. That might be a bold take, but there are some songs on here like Angel of Death, probably the most famous from this album, that I think just is super compelling, especially on first listen. If you've never really heard thrash metal specifically and you don't really know the differentiation between it and like heavy metal or any other form of it out there, that is a perfect song to really introduce you to it, because that is fast paced, that is so energetic, it has so much punch to it that really gives a proper introduction to thrash metal if you are a first time listener. So that's a really, really good starting point for it, especially from this record as a whole, and overall a great, great album. Following that, totally different type of vibe here with our next one, Scarecrow by John Cougar Mellencamp. Another one of my dad's favorites here. He definitely played this one a lot growing up for me and my brother, so we are very familiar with this one. Honestly, I think this is a pretty good one. I don't come back to it all that much. I think John Cougar Mellencamp is more of a singles band for me, or a singles artist rather. I would probably rather listen to like a greatest hits compilation or something by him, but he can be fun in small doses. He has that sort of almost like Tom Petty, very similar to that, this kind of roots rock, Americana type of vibe to it, Midwest rock sort of feel, and he does that really, really well. I do wish that there was a little more variety at times. That's another kind of issue I have with John Cougar Mellencamp in general. At times he can be a little repetitive, but honestly, for what it's worth, this is still a pretty solid release. This album, on the other hand, had definitely gotten a lot more of criticism and hate than most of these other ones out there. We have Nickelback, Silver Side Up. Now, am I going to sit here and say that this is the best album of all time and that you should go out and listen to it immediately and that this tops, the Beatles and Green Day and Led Zeppelin and all these bands? No way. No way am I going to do that. In fact, I'm not even going to put it anywhere near the top here. It's going to go in the meh tier. I do think there are some okay parts to this album, and I do think that there are some okay parts to Nickelback in general. I don't think they fully deserve the hate they get, but when you are comparing them in a side by side kind of direct a ranking like this, they are going to be much, much more shallow, much, much more surface level than pretty much everything else on this tier list here. Judging it on its own merits, however, it could be worse. For a post-punk album in the 2000s, given everything else that was out there at the time, Nickelback isn't really that bad. I mean, it might be an unpopular opinion, but I would much rather listen to this than like Buck Cherry, and I would much rather listen to this than like Stained. I mean, there are worse out there. There are definitely worse out there. So judging it on its own merits, it's honestly not that bad. I think a meh tier is totally an acceptable place for this record. It's also going to be an acceptable place for Bon Jovi's Slippery When Wet. Did I just compare Bon Jovi and Nickelback and put them in the same tier? Yes, I did. Am I going to get hate for it? Yes, I am. Do I care? Not one bit. Because I think that Bon Jovi's Slippery When Wet is also just kind of middle of the road and just okay, Bon Jovi in general, they're a lot of fun. They can definitely be very energetic and very passionate at times, and that's totally cool with me. But they have just gotten way too much exposure. Way too many people just absolutely have adored them for so long, and certain songs, especially from Slippery When Wet, such as Living on a Prayer, for instance, have gotten way too much radio play and have been way too involved with, like, anytime you go to a sports game, like we went to a hockey game not too long ago, and it was, they played it at the arena and stuff, and it's just, it's fine. It's a fine song. It does not deserve to be as popular and to be as recognized as it is. is really my big beef with it. And in general, I just feel like, again, cohesively, this record is more prone to singles and, big individual song releases than being a very well crafted, put together record as a whole. And again, for most of these, that's really what the main criteria is going to be about. And this one just doesn't really, get to that same level in general. So even though, it probably is still pretty solid, like, individually, there just isn't a lot cohesively here to really warrant a higher placement than a Met here. On the other hand, Tears for Fears and their album Songs from the Big Chair, well, that is a record if I've ever seen one. That's going in the A1 tier, man. I mean, Tears for Fears are so fucking good, man. I love Tears for Fears so much. They just have this great sort of like alt rock and kind of like synth rock sort of vibe to them. I mean, they are the 80s band, if there was ever one. They are like a perfect embodiment of the 80s, better than Bon Jovi by far. Everybody Wants to Rule the World, that's a song that does have a ton of exposure, but I've never gotten sick of listening to it. I gotta tell you, I've never gotten sick of it. They could play that at every goddamn game, for the rest of sports history, and I would be okay with it because I love that song. And there's so many great deep cuts on this song. Head Over Heels, man. If you've never listened to Head Over Heels, that's a song that you have to do immediately. Once you are finished with this video, go check that out. That is an incredible song, man. I love that one so much. But yeah, Tears for Fears, absolutely amazing. A1 tier, for sure. We just have a few more albums to get through here, so we're going to wrap this up in just a minute here. We'll go through these last ones pretty quickly. Next up, Tango in the Night here with Fleetwood Mac. Unpopular opinion, but that is a god tier record, my friend. Another one that I'm putting a lesser known album above, again, probably the most popular here, which in this case would be Rumors by Fleetwood Mac, which I think honestly is just kind of, it's good. I'm not going to say it's bad because I don't want to die. I don't want to get hate mail thrown at me, but I do think that, again, it does suffer from a little bit of an overexposure, and, a song like Go Your Own Way has gotten a lot of radio play and such, but Tango in the Night, on the other hand, this is so underrated, man, and every goddamn member from Fleetwood Mac does an incredible job. They know their part, they know their place, they earn it, they stick with it, they do it justice every single time. Lindsey Buckingham is absolutely phenomenal. He is a top 5 guitarist in rock history. Stevie Nicks and Christine McVie have just gorgeous voices here that just pair so well. Mick Fleetwood on the drums to anchor it. I mean, there is just so much to love here. You really cannot go wrong with Tango in the Night whatsoever. Pick it up, give it a listen, whatever you got to do to get it into your ears, my friends, because that is an incredible release. Following that, we have Tragic Kingdom here by No Doubt. We were mentioning No Doubt earlier. Gwen Stefani, another great rock singer who just happens to be female, of course. But yeah, this is another one. It's going way up here in the A1 tier. What's really, really cool about Tragic Kingdom, and really cool about No Doubt in general, is that they always played into the trends of the time. Whenever the record came out, whatever year it came out, you can look to see what else was popular at that time or what else was trendy at that time, and you can distinctly pick out which elements they threw onto their record to make it as good as they possibly could. And in this case, in the mid-90s, the third wave of ska and the reggae elements and the punk elements, like you saw on Green Day's early work, like you saw on Blink's early work, that all kind of came together to make Tragic Kingdom a very diverse and very nuanced record compared to what else was out there. And in comparison to how it's aged, especially compared to a lot of the others that we've talked about already, I think Tragic Kingdom has really aged very well because it takes a lot of those elements that were popular of the time, that were big, that were trendy, that haven't really stuck around much. And this is their one little piece of art that they can cling to say there was a time where this was big and where this was, looked at as very, very good, and they can be celebrated as a result of that. Third wave ska has completely disappeared in the rock scene, that no one has even thought to play it in the last 20 years. But because this album has stuck around for as long as it has, and because No Doubt is as, influential as they are, the songs have still sprung up every now and again, and it comes on and you think, wow, this is very different compared to Imagine Dragons or compared to, Fall Out Boy or whatever else has been out in the last 10 years. And so it really does stand out as just a monolithic record in a very unique way compared to most. So for that alone, we have to give it big, big props here. We got to go A1 tier. Oh, man. All right, I lied when I said that there was one more bad one to get through. We have one last one, and then I promise we're done with all the negatives here. We have the Velvet Underground and Nico. And again, probably going to get some hate thrown at me in the comments for this one, but yikes, guys. I'm sorry. I can't do this one. I can't. I can appreciate Lou Reed, and I can appreciate, the Velvet Underground for attempting to do something very out there and avant-garde. And for many people, it was very successful. And it has been credited and looked at, in retrospect as being one of the best rock albums of all time by many big publications. And, many people still are a huge fan of that. And that's totally fine if that's who you are. For me, though, this is just too, experimental. It's just too out there. When you talk about experimental rock nowadays, we were talking about King Gizzard earlier, so we use them as an example. They still have a lot of pop-friendly melody and harmony and hooks to them that make it memorable while also introducing these very worldly and very, international type of instruments and genres to it that blend much better because they still include some pop into it. You can't really have something that's like full on avant-garde and expect it to be, appreciated by the masses because there just isn't really any melody or anything to, kind of hook or nothing that's, really that catchy with the Velvet Underground. And as a result, if you want to try to listen to it, you have to be just incredibly dedicated and incredibly gutsy to try to take on this one because it is just so much, noise. That's really the best way to describe it. It's just so much noise, and it just does not flow at all for me. There is just no sense of a pattern or a harmony or anything here to really bridge the gap. And so as a result, massive thumbs down. Definitely ignore it. if that's just the advice I could give you, just definitely ignore this one. One album that you shouldn't ignore, though, Wolves, as our last one here by Rise Against. This one's going in the A1 tier, rounding out a very, very compelling, very, very solid album on this tier list here. So that is it, my friends, for the rock album tier list. 50 of the most iconic and most popular albums ranked on my world famous 7 tiers. If you have suggestions for a potential part 2 to this, there are plenty more albums that we could talk about that we just scratched the surface with this one on. But if you would like to see a part 2, leave some suggestions in the comments for records that you would like me to talk about next time. Of course, if you have any thoughts on my list here, feel free to leave them in the comments as well. With that in mind, thanks for your support. Thanks for subscribing, liking, commenting. This channel has just absolutely blown up in the past few weeks, and it is all thanks to you guys. We recently hit 1,000 subscribers, which is mind-blowing. I think we're a little over that, actually. We're just under 1,500 now, which is insane. So I just want to thank you guys so much for that. And with that, have a great rest of your day. Take care, everyone.